Okay, I made Chabad of the Hamptons co-host. Are you able to admit people? You see that?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So then
Yeah,
I'm
that's
going
good.
to,
Okay. So that's all?
yeah, just as you see people trying to enter, just admit them.
And then I
Because
can just turn off the recording? Well, that'll be the only
the
other
record,
thing?
no, the recording should be on. I started the recording already.
Okay. Okay.
Perfect. Okay, good. I'm
Thank
going
you.
to, no problem. If
Thank
you,
you.
yeah, if you have any issue, give me a call.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good morning, everybody that's on. If you want to get a chumash for the Rashi, I should have posted that. I'll post it right now. Morning, Devary.
Good morning.
A little
A little
earlier.
earlier.
This is by me.
This is by me. This is what gets me up Monday morning. I'm up and going, so I listen. While you're on the phone.
Devary, we have to start. Sorry, it's 10 o'clock.
Okay.
We'll talk after,
okay?
Good morning, everyone. It's 10 o'clock. We're going to do Yisro Gimel. And as we have been doing the last few months, it's hard to believe it's been months, we're learning in the schus of all of those who have been abducted, that they should be returned home safe in body, in mind, in spirit. It should be immediately. And all those that need a refuah shlema should have a refuah shlema. And all those who have been displaced should be able to find menuchas hanefesh. And there should be shalom al Yisrael. There should be shalom everywhere. Mashiach should come. That's it. Also want to say a very big thank you to everyone. I guess our team was able to fulfill our goal for the project. So a very, very big thank you to everyone for that. Also want, look at Joni's scream. Also want to mention Simchas. Goldie Baumgarten, I assume, may not be on next week, Monday. So want to wish her a great, huge mazel tov on the marriage of her daughter Leah to Meir Chazanovich next Tuesday, Be'ezrat Hashem. Big mazel tov to Chani Rappaport for the bar mitzvah of her Enikol Eli Dubav, son of her daughter Dina. Big mazel tov to Elisheva Mishulavin on the engagement of her daughter Nechama to Yisrael Rivkin, B'Shah Teva Mutzlachas, and my granddaughter Musya Slonim became bat mitzvah this past Shabbos, and there should only be simchas for all of us only simchas, only and always. I also want to ask everybody to keep in mind our learning for the refuah shlema of Shneir Zalman ben Chana, that he should have a refuah shlema ba'efen nisi. We're going to start now. The sikh again is Yisro Gimel. And it is a Rashi sikha. So if you have a Chumash and Rashi, that will be great. And it is the very last pasuk in our parsha, the very last pasuk in Parshas Yisro. Just want to recognize that this sikha might take us a little bit out of our comfort zone, but I think that we are all going to be very happy that we did this, Be'ezus Hashem. But it's a little bit of a pull here, but we got this. Okay, so the Rebbe says, B'siyum Parshasenu, the very end of our parsha, it's Pasuk Chaf Gimel in Perek Chaf. The Pasuk reads, V'lo yis'aleh b'ma'alos al mizbechi. You shall not go up to my altar with steps. Why? Asher lo sigala ervascha alav, so that your nakedness will not be revealed upon it. So on these words, where the Torah tells us that for the Kohanim to access the Mizbeach, which was on, it was above ground, it was on a platform, instead of using steps, which you may have thought would be the best way for them to access, instead, a ramp should be built. Now, Isa b'Mechilta, the Mechilta writes, we're in the Sikha now, Varei Dvarim kal v'chomer, and we learn a kal v'chomer, which means that we look at something and we say, if this is true, then how much more so something else would be true. So if you can't take a cookie out of my cookie jar without asking me, you definitely cannot take my car keys without asking me. Okay, so the Mechilta says, we learn a kal v'chomer. Uma avanim she'ein bahem das loy l'ra v'loy l'teva. If we're talking about stones, an inanimate object that does not have cognition, that does not understand bad from good, and regarding that, Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu loy tinahik behem minig bizayin, that you shouldn't act towards these stones in a way that is demeaning or deprecating or insulting, and Rashi explains that because in order to go up steps, you have to raise your feet, you have to walk in a way that might expose parts of the body that are not usually exposed, and this would be considered a slight, an insult to the stones. So if Hashem said that you shouldn't act towards this inanimate matter in such a way, Chavercha, shehu b'dmusay shel misha amar v'haya elam. So if you're talking about your friend, your fellow, who was created in the image of he who said, and therefore the world came into being, dinhu sheloi tinik by minag bizayin. The halacha is that you're not allowed to embarrass or slight or in any way demean your friend. Okay? So the Mechilta brings this down. Now, kal v'chomer zeh. Now, this very same kal v'chomer, meaning how much more so, hu v'gam b'perish Rashi. Rashi also makes the same point, using that same paradigm of a kal v'chomer, aval b'shinuyim v'haisafos. But Rashi makes changes and he makes additions. So if you have the Chumash in front of you and you have the Rashi, let's do it inside. Ashaloi tigala ervascha, so that your nakedness not be revealed. She'al yedei hamalos atatzarech laharchiv psiyosecha, because due to steps, you will have to broaden your strides. In other words, you have to separate your feet in greater manner. And even though it would not be actual uncovering of nakedness, because the Torah says that you should make for the Kohanim linen pants or linen knickers, mikol makayim, still and all, Harchavais hapsiais, when you broaden your steps or your strides, karayv legili ervahu. It is close enough to uncovering one's nakedness. Vatanoyig ba minag bizayin, and through this coming close to uncovering nakedness, this is a form of disrespect towards the stones. Barei dvarim kal v'chomer. Rashi says, and this is a kal v'chomer. You can derive from these things a fortiori. Uma avanim halalu she'ein bahem das lahakpir al bizyonon. Just as these stones that have no ability to take offense at their denigration, Amra Torah, but the Torah states still, since there is a need for these steps, do not act disrespectfully towards them. Chavercha, how much more so your fellow man, who's in the image of your creator, and does take offense when he is embarrassed or as he is slighted, alachas kama v'kama, how much more so you must be careful not to show disrespect to a person. Okay. Vihide. We're in the third paragraph of the Sikha. Vihine. Mashanakat Rashi aloshan she'ein behem das lahakpir al bizyonin. So Rashi uses the following terminology, that the stone, the inanimate matter, does not have sentience, does not have das, does not have cognition to take offense when they are slighted. Okay. Shelek lashon hamechilta. And this is different from what the Mechilta said, because the Mechilta said, she'ein bahem das loy l'ra v'loy l'teva. The Mechilta said about the stones that they don't have sentience or discernment between things that are bad and good. So from the fact that Rashi changed it, move on bepashto, so it's understood, that Rashi wants to underscore the lack of possibility for stones to feel embarrassed. Juxtaposed upon the fact that your friend would feel embarrassed if you don't act properly towards them. Through this, musbar kal v'chomer zeh bepashtos v'hu b'yeser se'es. So through what Rashi does, the kal v'chomer is understood so much more strongly. Umahai taima, and for this very reason, gam hoisif Rashi legabe chavercha es hatevois umakpid al bizyoinoi delese b'mechilta. And for the very same reason, because Rashi wants to set this juxtaposition up in sharp relief, for the very same reason, Rashi adds the words umakpid al bizyoinoi, that your friend is sensitive to being embarrassed. And the Mechilta does not include that. The Chain. And then, in the same fashion, another difference between the Mechilta and Rashi. Halashim beperish Rashi, chavercha shehu bidmus yitzrucha. Rashi says, your friend or your fellow human being who is created in the image of your creator, b'makam lashon hamechilta bidmusay shel misha amar v'haya elam, which is different than what the Mechilta says. The Mechilta says that your fellow is created in the image of he who said, and therefore created the world. And why does Rashi do this? He lefi shekavanas habitu yitzrucha he kapashut liyitzre shel ha'ela b'ma'alais, because Rashi is using a term that is more resonant with a human being. It's closer to us. He's underscoring, he's saying that by using the term yitzrucha, it's simple. It is the one who created the person who is going up on the steps. And it's something that we can all relate to. Ach tzarech lahavin. But we have to understand. So in other words, these two differences between the Mechilta and Rashi, it's logical. We understand. But we have to understand, as Haisafasoi Shal Rashi Alashon HaMechilta, but we have to understand something that Rashi adds that the Mechilta does not. Rashi says, Amra Taira, Taira says about the stones, Hayil v'yesh behem tzerech. Why do you have to have special regard? Why do you have to have special sensitivity? Why do you have to have special respect for the stones? Because they serve a particular purpose. Ma moisif kan hatzerech sheyesh ba'avodim b'hasbaras hakal v'chomer hanilmod mehem al chavercha. So the Rebbe asks, what does this add? In other words, what does it add to say that you have to have respect for the stones because they're necessary for a particular purpose? The kal v'chomer would stand either way. Kal v'chomer is that you have to be sensitive to something that is inanimate. In this particular case, it's stone, upon which Kohanim would alight to go to the Mizbeach. And Rashi is saying that it would be a form of embarrassment for the stones if the Kohanim would take steps, because that causes more revelation of a part of a body that's usually covered. And if you have to be sensitive to stone, how much more so you have to be sensitive to a person? But the Rebbe is asking, but why is it necessary for Rashi to say that the reason you have to be sensitive to the stones is because they serve a particular purpose? The Mechilta doesn't go there, but Rashi underscores this. And again, when the Rebbe studies Rashi with us, he is always operating under the assumption that Rashi uses the least amount of words necessary, which means that if he adds something, it's absolutely necessary to the pshat. And so the Rebbe is asking, why? Beis, Seif Beis, V'yuvan, and we'll understand this, Bahakdim, by prefacing Hachiluk bein Oifen HaPerish V'Halimo Shel Divrei HaKosov She'olav Nemar Kal V'chomer Anal HaMevor B'Mechilta Lo'Oifen Hasbaras HaDvarim B'Perish Rashi. So the Rebbe is giving us a rule, and that is that yes, sometimes we might think that Rashi is simply a digest of teachings found in different sources. It could be found in the Mechilta, could be found in the Tanchuma, could be found in the Gemara, could be found here, there, and everywhere. And Rashi simply cherry-picked things that were of interest to him or that he felt was absolutely necessary to learn the pshat. But over and over in Rashi Sichos, the Rebbe explains to us that it's not so simple, that Rashi does take from places, but he often changes the terminology. He often changes the order of what he brings, how he brings it. He sometimes will take one thing, but he will not take another, and so on and so forth. And the Rebbe like zooms in, under the microscope. And what he's doing here is he's telling us, in order to understand these differences, we have to understand what is the question that drives the Mechilta, and what is the question that drives Rashi. And then you'll understand why the terminology is different in each case, because they're not looking at the same question. So he says to understand what Mechilta is focusing on, we have to get a broader understanding of the Mechilta, right? So we're going to zoom out. V'zeh lashon ha-Mechilta sham le'il. And the Rebbe says, and here's more of the Mechilta that we cited. So the Mechilta says, on the words, Asher lo yisegala ervascha alav, you shall not reveal your nakedness upon it. Alav iatapeseya, aval atapeseya psia gasa behechel b'keish hakadoshim. The Mechilta's question is, oh, interesting. When it comes to the steps of the Mizbeach, you can't take large steps because we're worried that you're going to reveal too much of what is normally covered. But when it comes to walking in the Heichal and the Kodesh HaKadoshim, no such concern. Shehi Badin, because that's permitted. Now, the Mechilta says, Uma imizbeach hakal asur lifsoya b'psiya. Shouldn't it be different? If you're talking about the Mizbeach, now regarding the Mizbeach, because of its location, it's located in the Azara. So the halachas about it are kal. They are less strict. So if you're not allowed to reveal aspects of the body that are normally covered, hahechal, the kodesh hakadashim hachamurim din shehu asur l'fsai psiak asa behen l'fi shein chamur. You would think that in the hechal and certainly in the kodesh hakadashim, you would not be permitted to take a large step, because the halachos about those areas are much more stringent. Talmud Laimar, the Torah teaches us, boy, on the stones of that lead to the Mizbeach, there you cannot take psia yisera. You cannot take a step that is like larger or extra. But you could take a larger step in the Heichel and the Kodesh Kodashim. And then the Mechilta continues by bringing the Kal V'chomer that we already referenced, that if you have to be careful about not slighting or deprecating or demeaning or insulting stones, how much more so you have to be sensitive to a human being. That's the Mechilta. Aval Rashi, but Rashi is driven by a different question. B'tchilas perushay b'voy lahasbir zakosov perish kedolahalon.
I'm sorry to interrupt. But I'm not following. We're in the Heichal, we're in the Kodesh Kodashim. Are they taking that extra psia? And why is it different? I still understand the difference.
Okay, so the Rebbe didn't yet tell us what the difference is.
Oh, it'll come in later?
Yeah, and it's not
Okay,
it's
fine, I'm
not
sorry.
necessarily steps. We'll see. There are steps in other parts of the Beis Hamikdash compound, but it seems that maybe even taking a larger step, even if it's not going up, is also under consideration. But the Rebbe is going to explain.
Okay.
Right now, he's just kind of staging it. He's saying, let's look at the difference between what the context is. The context in the Mechilta is the question, why are these steps different than other steps? Rashi is focusing on something different. And we're not going to see what Rashi is focusing on yet, okay? So I'm just giving you an alert. He's just reviewing the Rashi in the next paragraph, and then we're going to go back to the Mechilta, and then we're going to go to the next if where we treat the Rashi. Okay. Aval Rashi b'tchilas perushay b'voy lahasbir zakosov perish gedahalon she'al yedei hamalis atatzarek laharchiv psioisecha. Rashi is focused on the fact that because there are steps, you are forced to widen your step. And although it's not actually revealing nakedness because they were wearing pants, nevertheless, the fact that there are steps and that necessitates a larger separation of the feet, the legs, it's kar of the Gilui Erva, it's close to the exposure of nakedness, and that would be some type of slight. That would be some type of embarrassment. Now we're going back to the Mechilta. Take it la'achar hamiut olav iata pesea psia gasa avalata pesea behechel v'kadosh kadashim. Right after the Mechilta explains what's bothering him, that you can't take the steps to go up to the Mizbeach, but you could take the steps in other parts of the Mikdash. Ish leimar shehi lefisha bekach miyusheves kushya alula lehisayra. The reason for this, the reason the Mechilta does this, is because through this, he is trying to resolve a question that might arise. L'chayra, seemingly, ha'isr lo'isigalar v'aschalav lo'itnahig behem minig b'zayin, seemingly, the prohibition of not uncovering or revealing your nakedness on the steps of the Mizbeach, because this would be demeaning, She'enoi machmas avnei hamizbeach mitzad atzman. Seemingly, this would not be because we're concerned about the actual stone. But rather because they are part of the Mizbeach, they're part of the Mikdash. So it's not the stone that we're concerned about. We're not concerned with the feelings, quote unquote, of inanimate matter. We're concerned with an overarching thing here, and that is Hashem, basically. We're concerned with the holiness of the Mizbeach. We're concerned with the awe that should surround the Mizbeach, which is connected to the glory of Hashem, which rests on the Mizbeach. And in brackets, the Rebbe says, "Balderech mitzvahs Maria Mikdash Bichlal," and this would be in keeping with the general laws surrounding behavior and comportment in the Beis Hamikdash, in the Mishkan. Asher lo yamin hamikdash ata yarei ela mimi sheshochen shchinasi b'makam hazeh. That it's not, the Rambam says in the Sefer HaMitzvos, it's not that you are fearing or showing awe to the Mikdash itself, but from the Eibishter who is resting there. U'b'lashon hachinuch, and like the Sefer HaChinuch says, shemitzvah zuhi likbaya b'nafsheisenu yiras hamokim baruch hu v'chashivusoi v'al kein huzarnu shaloi linak sham kalus reish b'shum inyan. In the words of the Sefer HaChinuch, the mitzvahs surrounding comportment in the Mishkan and the Mikdash were in order to set firmly in our souls awe of Hashem and the importance of everything that surrounds HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore we were warned against acting in a frivolous manner anywhere near the Mikdash. V'im kain. So here's the question of the Mechilta. So if the whole idea of not showing disrespect to the stones of the Mizbeach is connected to the overarching behavior that must surround the Mikdash, so then the question is, איך אפשר ללמוד קל וחומר מהאבנים על חברך, בשעה שבאבנים יש קדושה שאינה בחברך? So the question now is turned on its head. You might have started thinking, oh, really? You're going to learn from how we act to stones towards how you act to people? You have to act to people in a whole different way than you act to stones, obviously. But the Mechilta is actually concerned about the opposite. How can you learn to treat people with the same level of sensitivity that you have to show to the stones leading up to the Mizbeach? Why should this be very difficult? Because everything having to do with the Mikdash has a spectacular and unparalleled level of holiness. But your friend, maybe not. And that's the question that the Mechilta is grappling with. Ulam, however, Keban shelamadnu kaidem lachein min hakasav ki olavia tapaseh psia gasa vala tapaseh psia gasa behechal b'kadosh kadashim. But that's now what the Mechilta is doing with his wording, that he's bringing down, because that we already learned that on the steps leading up to the Mizbeach, you cannot take a big step, but you could take a big step in other parts of the Mikdash. And based on the thesis above, that you might think that the reason that you can't step on the steps is because it has to do with the overarching kavod that has to be accorded to the Mikdash. So now we have a new question. Why would you have to treat the stones of the Mizbeach with a higher level of sensitivity than other parts of the Mikdash? Isn't there an overarching cover that you have to show to the whole Mikdash? On the contrary, it should be even more. It should be the opposite. It should be that we should be more concerned with taking larger steps in the Heichal and the Kodesh HaKodashim than the than with taking larger steps on the stones that lead up to the Mizbeach. Nimtza, move on. So from this we understand it doesn't have to do only or even mainly with the fact that it's part of the mikdash, and every part of the mikdash necessitates a very high level of holiness and respect. But no, it has to do with understanding the purpose that these stones serve. And therefore, we can learn a kal v'chomer from this to how you treat people. So no, it doesn't have to do with the overarching holiness of the whole mikdash. Because if it did have to do with that, then you would be wondering, how could you draw a kal v'chomer between that and your friend? Every part of the Beis Hamikdash has a spectacular level of holiness. Not every person has that same holiness. But the Mechilta says, no, it's not. That's not the issue. Dinhu shaloitin by minhag bizayin. You can't show it disrespect, but it's not connected to the overarching holiness of the whole Mikdash. It's something else. Yuvan gam hatam lohi sefas Rashi beperushay amra teira hoyel v'yish behem tzarech loy tinag behem minhag bizayin. Rashi is actually underscoring this in a whole different way, and therefore he adds, the Torah says that because the stones serve a certain purpose, you should not treat them in a way that they might be slighted. We're in the beginning of Seif Gimel. Me'acha shebeperish Rashi loy niskar hamiut olavia tapeseya vala tapeseya behechal v'kodesh kadashim shemimenu shamanu she'eser v'loy sala b'malos kashor la'avnei hamizbeach mitzad asman kanal. Because Rashi doesn't bring down that whole part from the Mechilta, where the Mechilta asks the question, why would you treat the steps of the Mizbeach different than the rest of the Heichal, different than the rest of the Mikdash complex? Therefore, Rashi adds that the Torah tells us you have to respect the stones because they serve a certain purpose. Therefore, Rashi lahadgish inizeh b'toicha kal v'chaim gufa. And how does Rashi do that? Hayil v'yesh bahem tzarech. Rashi does so by saying that this is because these stones, bahem, there's a particular necessity. Perush, what does this mean? Kevan sheba'avonim halalu avnei hamizbeach yesh inim miyuchad yesh bahem tzarech. Because these stones have they serve a certain purpose, they answer a certain need. Shahu hagoyim es isa shalei sala b'malis shalei sigala v'schalav, and that purpose that the stones serve causes there to be this halacha that you shouldn't walk upon them in a way that reveals nakedness because it might slight them. So therefore, it's understood that Isser al Avnei Hamizbeach Kishel Atzman, that the prohibition concerning walking in a disrespectful way on the stones of the Mizbeach, loy mifas heyosan chelek mechlalos hamikdash, is not because they are another part of the mikdash, elohayil v'yesh bahem tzarech, but rather it's because they serve a particular purpose that is separate and apart from the overall holiness that the entire mikdash holds. And now it's understood clearly, simply, now we circle back and we can understand why there is no prohibition on building steps in other parts of the Mikdash complex, even though here we see that there is a concern with revealing nakedness. V'adarabba, on the contrary, hayu by ma'alos shebehen hayu oilin le'ulam v'lehechal. In fact, there were steps. The whole Shir Hamalis, where the Levium saying there were steps that led to the hall and to the Heichal. Shekain al havonim shebemailas elu lo nitan leimar sheish behem tzarech k'meikan. But the thing is that regarding those other steps, they did not serve a necessary purpose like these steps did. And if you look in footnote 20, Aval Hamailis Bashar Makaimes Min Hachil Ezras Nashim Yisro Ezras Kaihanim Ein Kushya Kolkach. Regarding the other steps that existed is not such a big question. Ki he michutz lemokim hamizbeach vehe mikaimes shagam zor mutar likonis l'sham. There are places where pedestrian Jews, where everybody, as long as you were in a state of Tara, could enter, and they were not of necessity to kohanim per se and exclusively. So it's different. Dalit. V'abir bazeh. And to further explain, halimud me'avnei mizbeach she'asur levazos ben Yisrael acher. This whole limud, this whole lesson that Rashi teaches here, from the stones of the Mizbeach, that we learn from this that you're not allowed to insult another Jew. Dilachayra tamua. The whole thing begs a big question. Really? You need to resort to a kal v'chomer from how we treat the stones in the Mizbeach to teach you that you shouldn't embarrass another person? You don't already know this? Isn't this plain and simple? But the Rebbe teaches, what Rashi's teaching here, that we should learn a kal v'chomer, that we should take a lesson from how the steps of the Mizbeach have to be treated. We are not talking about actual embarrassment. Ki im b'loshen hamechilta b'Rashi b'minag b'zoyim b'vad. We're talking about something that is, you could say, adjacent to embarrassing somebody, a slight. It's subtle. It's subtle. And it's subtle, hein mitzat havonim, she'ein behem herger shel bizayin. First of all, we're talking about stones, and stones don't have feelings. And when you're talking about embarrassment, having feelings is the main thing. Va'ad, and the Rebbe brings down from the Gemara proof of this. Liba disvara achas beGemara, that according to one opinion, the Gemara, kol chiyuv tashlumei boishes. We know that in the Torah we learn that there are various compensations that have to be given. There's workman's compensation, there's medical expenses, and there's boishes, there's embarrassment. And there's an opinion, the Gemara, that says that the whole paradigm of having to pay someone for embarrassment that they feel, that they undergo because of something that happened to them, it's only when it's possible for that person to experience shame or embarrassment. Aval im bishay yashen umeis. But if you embarrass somebody who's sleeping or somebody who is deceased, and since this person can never feel the embarrassment, you are free from paying that money you would have to pay otherwise for the shame that they incurred. So the Rebbe is saying, so in this kal v'chomer, we're not talking about actual embarrassment. We're talking about a slight, a type of demeaning someone, or deprecating someone that's very subtle. we learn how subtle it is because, first of all, we're talking about stones, and stones don't have feeling. So seemingly the whole relevance of embarrassment to stones is non-existent, but obviously it exists. So let's just say it's negligible. Okay. So we're learning how careful we have to be, how subtle it is. That's number one, because we're talking about stones. The hey mitzad masa habizayin. And then let's look at what is considered demeaning. She'ein hamedubar kan b'hanhaga shel kalos roish, ki kalos roish bizoyim mamash asurim b'chol shetach hamishkan v'mikdash. We're not talking here about acting frivolously, because acting frivolously or acting in an embarrassing manner is forbidden in the whole area of the mikdash. Ela hanidud kan hu minig bizoyin bavad, masa she'olo lisparish ki inyan shel bizoyin. We're talking about a slight. We're talking about something that could be construed as embarrassment. Because remember, the Kohanim are wearing pants. So even if they have to lift their feet up ever so slightly to walk up the steps, what's the stone going to see? Linen pants. Ukedivi Rashi, she'etela oila b'malos ha'amor kan, ein gilui erva mamash. Rashi takes pains to underscore this, that it's not the actual revelation of nakedness. Ela rak harav l'gilui erva. It's adjacent to. Umikan laimdim, or maybe mikan lamedim, legabe chaverei. So from here we learn, relevant to our fellow, she'asor la'asais maise, shehu minag bizayin, that it's forbidden to do something that could be considered a slight. Even that we're not allowed to do. Va'afilu kasher hala eina margish aydekach shum busha bizayin. And even when that person does not feel through that action, whatever it is, they do not feel shame. They do not feel embarrassed. But if it's something that could embarrass them or slight them in some way, we're not allowed to do it. בעניין זה הוא החילוק שבין המחילתא לפרש רש"י, מהי נקודתו של האיסור. And now we're in a position to understand the difference between the Mechilta and Rashi in terms of honing in on what is the central point of the prohibition. L'das ha-mechilta teichen ha-isuhu b'pu'ulas ha'adam, she'asur afilu la'asais maisa she'ena maisa bizayin elohu minag bizayin b'vad. According to the Mechilta, the prohibition devolves upon the person's action, that a person is prohibited from doing something that is not necessarily an embarrassment, but is even a slight, is adjacent to embarrassing. Even that, you're not allowed to do. V'ilu Rashi derech hapshat, but Rashi, who says always, V'ani lo basi ela lefarish pshuta shel mikra, eina yachal lefarish kain, ki lefi zeh ein tam lechalek ben avnei hamizbeach leavnei hechal. But Rashi is coming for pshat, and Rashi is not focusing on what the Mechilta stopped on, which is, why is there a difference between these stones, and not the stones in other places? Why can there be steps in other places, etc., or even walking in a certain way in other places? So what is he focusing on? Move on. So Rashi wants to underscore that from the perspective of what the person is doing, that would not be enough to prohibit it. Why? Because we're not talking about an actual shaming of anything. Ella sheba'avnei hamizbeach yesh inyan miyuchad. But rather that there's something very specific about these stones, these steps. And Rashi signals this by adding the words hayil, because beyesh bahem tzarech, there's a particular necessity for these stones, for these steps. And because the stones are so necessary, therefore, walking on it causes a slight, a demeaning action that is like shameful. Eitzel elu shetzrichim la'avonim halalu umemela hadavar asur. Okay, now I want to make sure that I explain this properly, and if I don't, please call me out on it. The Rebbe is explaining that Rashi is underscoring that what's so different about these steps is that the Kohen cannot access the Mizbeach in any other way. They're absolutely necessary. But by taking the steps, because it could cause something that is adjacent to Gilui Erva, to exposing something that is normally considered hidden, therefore, it sullies the one who has to do this, and therefore becomes asur. And the Rebbe is now going to explain this in elongated fashion. So in other words, we all the whole time we're thinking the person is doing something to the steps. But now the Rebbe is saying, he's flipping it, he's saying, having to go up those steps, which is absolutely necessary because the Kohen can't access it any other way, sullies the Kohen in having to do so because it causes a possible or something like exposure of that which is normally hidden. And therefore,
how does this work with the menorah, which you did have steps, and the only way you can do it is needed steps? And you had steps there.
that's a fantastic question, as is your MO Elisheva, to ask the best questions. I don't know what the answer is. Here is a possible answer.
Okay.
I could be completely wrong. I could be completely wrong on this, but the menorah was not so tall as much as the problem was that Aaron was very short. So maybe that's the answer, that for pragmatic reasons, Aaron needed the stool.
But all the
it's not
Kohanim, I thought they were tall. I thought, aren't they tall in general?
I'm going to look it up,
I don't
but I'm
know.
fairly
Yeah.
certain that I learned somewhere that Aaron was extraordinarily short.
This is true. The only thing is that we have Baha'aloischa, and the whole concept of Baha'aloischa is to go up. So
No, the whole thing Baha'aloischa is not to go up on the steps. Baha'aloischa is all about that you should make the flame. Rashi says there you should make the flame.
yeah,
go
but
up.
you also, but it brings up the point that you're going up the steps there, no? I don't remember directly the details.
I think it's about how you light the candles there,
Only?
the wicks. I could be wrong, but that's what I remember.
Okay, anyways, okay.
And I'm not sure but
Yeah,
but
but
that's
then
the
again,
answer,
but
and
here you're saying that but here you're saying that the whole thing is with the Kohen being embarrassed. So why would one embarrass Aaron, who is short, so he needed to go up? Like, this is where the question comes in, because Aaron was short and he had to go up, and here we're saying that we didn't want to embarrass the Kohen, right? That's what you started saying. I mean, I didn't finish
yeah, but
learning it yet.
not meets no, it's a different word.
All right, we'll see at the end.
No, let me just try to explain. You're asking that by Aaron having to stand on a stool, quote unquote, that would be embarrassing him because of his lack of stature?
No, he's going up, not that he's standing on a stool, but he's going up steps, which is the same concept.
I think the answer is that, and I could be wrong, but the answer is that by the Mizbeach, it was necessary. By the menorah, it wasn't a necessity mitzad how the menorah was built. It was just a pragmatic help for Aaron. So there's a difference milachatchila, and look at footnote 28. We didn't, you know what? Let's do Sevav, and we'll look at footnote 28. The Rebbe says, let's explain a little bit more. What does Rashi intend to say with saying, but there's a special need for these steps? His intention is שהכהנים אינם יכולים לעשות עבודתם על המזבח אלא על ידי טיפוסם ועלייתם על האבנים. That there's literally no other way for the Kohanim to do their work on the Mizbeach except for to alight onto the Mizbeach through some way. And if it was steps, they would have to walk on these steps. And that's why Hashem said, build a ramp, because we don't want to slight them. Lefisha kasher adam noying minu bizoyin bekeshel avnei hamizbeach, harei hu mivaze b'derech memela es hakehanim haskukim utzrichim lavonim elu. And look at footnote 28, because the kehanim are embarrassing the stones, but they're also embarrassing themselves that they need to resort to this kind of behavior. Or yesh leimar, footnote 28, or the Rebbe says we might say, the yesh behem tzarech hainu l'chol Yisrael, that really, that this is something that all of Bnei Yisrael need. And he goes on to say, Shamazbeach nivra laharich yamav shel adam, Shamazbeach matil sholem ben Yisrael avim shebashamayim. In other words, it would in some way sully or debase not just the Kohanim, but all of Klal Yisrael. And so the Eibusha says, no, you're going to build a ramp. Nobody's going to have to take larger than usual steps. There'll be no possible problem with a slight or an embarrassment, anything demeaning happening, because there will be no possible gilui erva. Ubidugmas, and the Rebbe says, this is like avaloi bishaven mamish, but not exactly, and we'll soon see why it's not exactly. Mashakasvu harishonim legabe chiyuv tashlumin shel boishes. The Rebbe goes back again to a discussion about when do you have to pay a person for embarrassment that they incurred through something you did. So the Rebbe says shahadin rikak bevigdoi patur, that somebody that spits on your clothing is patur from having to pay boishes. They don't have to pay for embarrassing. Why? This is only who dafka im hamizbayish loy lavash asabeged b'shas maisa. This is only if the person that was spit upon, the person that was embarrassed, was not wearing that article of clothing. Aval im hayalavush ba'isa shah be'es harakika beveged zeh chayav harakik. But if the spitter spit on the garment when the person was wearing the garment, then they are chayav, then they are culpable, then they do have to pay the compensation for embarrassment. Lefish al yedei riki kasoy ala beged harehu mivazes adam halavash beveged zeh. Because it's very logical. Because if you're spitting when the person is wearing the beged, you're embarrassing them, and that's why you have to pay them boishes. Now, where this, and the Rebbe bavarant is, the Rebbe equivocated by saying avaloi b'shava mamash, because I think that what might be tricky here or difficult is that when you're talking about somebody else spitting on somebody or something, it's easier to understand. Here, it's very subtle. It's that by walking up the steps and embarrassing the steps, the kohen is being slighted in the process. The kohen is being sullied, demeaned, in some way deprecated by having to engage in this. You know how we talk about like how you don't want to like answer certain people, you don't want to get in the mud with them. Because when you get in the mud, no matter what you say to them and you think like, oh, you gave it to them, you paid them back, you punished them, you're going to end up getting dirty. But when you're talking about the other steps and the other parts of the mikdash, you don't have the same dynamic because they're not absolutely necessary. Vitam hadavar aleph ki efshar lagia lahechel gam shelo yalidei malos, because to the part of the mikdash complex called the Heichal, you could access it in other ways you didn't have to use the steps. In footnote 32, "Afshe ein zeh derech bia," although this wasn't the conventional way, but you could access it in a different way. And all of us are familiar with structures built on mountains or built on elevations where to access it, either you go up through steps from one way, or you could access from a different door, which is on a different elevation, and you don't need steps. So the Rebbe explains, so the Heichal, it wasn't necessary. And that's number one. Umailas elu lo hayu lifnei ha'heichal, sheboi nasis havoida, ela lifnei ha'ulam. But these steps were actually in front of the ulam, which is kind of like a antechamber to the heichal. Umemela nimtza shehalichas hakahanim leheichal al yedei ha'mala shelifnei ha'ulam eina chelek v'tzoyrech b'avodasam b'heichal. It's not absolutely necessary to their avoida that they're going to do in the heichal, because it's like a grama. It's like the ulam is before the heichal, so it's not a direct line. But the way that you access the mizbeach was part of the mizbeach. The ramp was part of the mizbeach. Al mizbechi. Asher lo segala ervascha olav. You could see from the words of the pasuk that the way in which you access the mizbeach is considered part of the mizbeach. Hainu, meaning sha'oile b'mailos oy b'keves ela mizbeach nechshav kemi shenimtza ala mizbeach gufa. Once you went onto the ramp, you were considered to be on the mizbeach already. There's no daylight. There's no degrees of separation. And from this we learn regarding embarrassing or slighting somebody else. Even when it's simply a slight, it's not a full-throated embarrassment or shaming. And maybe it didn't even lead to any practical way in which your fellow was embarrassed. Still in all, but because the person was created in the image of Hashem, just like if you did something that was unseemly on the steps, it would already be considered like it was a slight on the Mizbeach. In the same way, when you embarrass a person, it's like you're embarrassing Hashem. It's bidugmas Yisro loisala b'mailas ala Mizbeach, al Mizbechi, that you shouldn't go up with steps on my Mizbeach. Shemid bizayin anasa b'keshel avonim, goyrim bizayin l'kayhanim. It causes a bizayin to the kayhanim, that they have to do this. Zayin. Al pizet tuvan gam loshen Rashi b'havir yasakal v'chaymer. And now we're in a position to understand and to more carefully parse the terminology of what Rashi says here when he brings the kal v'chaymer. He says, Uma avonim halalu. And if we're talking about these stones, she'ein bahem das lahakpid al bizyonon, they have no ability to take umbrage on their being embarrassed. Yet the Torah says that because they serve a particular necessity, you're not allowed to slight them. How much more so your fellow who was created in the image of your creator, and is careful or will take umbrage and will be attentive to embarrassment, alachas kama v'kama, how much more so you have to be careful. And Rashi's terminology is not like the Mechilta. Shasham leisa haloshen lahakpid al bizyonin. The Mechilta does not mention this terminology about taking umbrage on one's embarrassment. Umakpid al bizyonin. This whole idea of even caring about embarrassment. Ki bekach ba Rashi lahasberes hadvarim kitalahala. By inserting this, Rashi is explaining the following. Uma im ba'avonim halalu she'ein behem das lahakpid, umemela ein behen klal ikar hageder shel bizayon. If you're talking about stones, stones don't have the ability to be sensitive to embarrassment. They are lacking the basic characteristic for embarrassment, that is feelings. And halachically, somebody who, like we said earlier, is sleeping or has passed, then if they're not makpid on being embarrassed, then they're not embarrassed. And maybe this is even maybe it's even talking about a person that's alive, but for whatever reason, it doesn't bother them. So then there's no embarrassment. Then how much more so you're not allowed to act in minhag bizayon, even in a subtle slight towards your fellow. Aleph, shehu b'dmus yotzcha, hainu sheshaychusa yim yotzcha hi yeshira v'nikeres. Doesn't matter, because what do we learn from the stones? That even if they don't feel embarrassment, you're not allowed to embarrass them. So how much more so your friend, your fellow, who is created in the image of your creator, meaning that their connection to the creator is a straight and recognizable connection. And this is not like the Kaihanim and the stones that don't share characteristics. But your fellow and the creator, they share characteristics. So how much more so you have to be careful. And Beis, and your friend, your fellow, is a person, and therefore people are makpid. They do take umbrage when they are embarrassed. Umemela, af mitzad chavercha gufa titachen kamitzir shel bizoyin, ma she'en kim ba'avnei hamizbeach shesham ein klal bizoyin mitzad avanim atzma. And by your friend, it is the paradigm of embarrassment. In contradistinction, if you're talking about the stones in the mizbeach, there you can't really be talking about bizayin embarrassment. You could be talking about minhag bizayin, a possible slight, but not actual embarrassment, because actual embarrassment necessitates feelings and relating to that embarrassment. And in ches, this is really it's really something absolutely gorgeous here. Perushi Rashi al Torah harehim yena shel Torah. Rashi's commentary on the commentary on the pasuk is the wine of Torah. It's the deepest part. It's the most delicious part. V'yesh leimar. Sheba perish Rashi zeh shebasiyum aparsha v'hakol hoilach achar hachitum mirumazim ikra v'teichna shel klalos haparsha inyin matan Torah seres hadibris. We might say that in this commentary of Rashi, which comes on the last pasuk of the parsha, and we have a rule in Gemara Brachos that everything is reckoned after its final aspect, which is why people take great pains with dessert especially after a lavish meal, because the way things end is kind of the impression that you leave with, is so everything goes according to the end. So in the words of Rashi is alluded to a main aspect of this whole parsha. And what's the main aspect of the whole parsha? Matan Torah, Seres HaDibros. Hands down, that is the central aspect of this week's parsha. What's the connection between what Rashi teaches here and the central theme of this week's parsha? Kishem shabaseres hadibras nichlalu loirak hadibras anechi Hashem lekecha v'lo yilacha ha'inyanim hanalim b'yoser ba'achdus Hashem. Just like in Aseres Hadibras were included, not just these sweeping theological statements, I am your God, and you should not have any other gods upon me. These are overarching ideas about the unity of God. But included in the Aseres Hadibras, Elagam Hadibras Achreinim, are also the latter dibras, shehem dvarim shutim, simple, logical things, v'afen yanap shutim b'yoser, and the most basic things, shemin adam l'chaverei, between one person and another, like lo yisirtzach, lo yisinaf, kol ha'shel ha'reacha, you shouldn't murder, you shouldn't commit adultery, you shouldn't covet what your friend has. I mean, pretty basic, pretty logical. And just like the Aseres Hadibras includes these, Kenu Gam Beperish Rashi, Teresh Shebal Peh. So is it in Rashi's commentary, which is Teresh Shebal Peh. Shesoifa Shel Parshas Yisro. What's the very last thing in the commentary of Rashi and Parshas Yisro? Oisek b'nechitzusa shel hazehirus b'tachlis binyanim shotim shel hanhagais ben adam lechavera va'ad lezehirus afilu mepnei minag b'zoyin. What does the last Rashi concern itself with? The imperative to be absolutely punctilious and very, very attentive and careful with seemingly a simple thing, how you treat your fellow. All the way to a subtle slight, minag bizayin. And just like the latter dibros are not separate and apart from the first dibros. In other words, we don't say, oh, those sweeping theological statements, those are really the important dibros. But then the ones that come after, those are, not important. No. Ella kimivor bekama mekaymes hatam shemekayimam shel dvarim elu nikva baseres hadibros ugam kedei lelamdenu shehem va'anochi Hashem lekecha inyan echad hema. But the Rebbe says, as spoken previous times, the reason for why those seemingly basic, simplistic, logical things were ascertained to be part of the Aseres Hadibros is to teach us that not killing and not stealing and not coveting is one and the same with Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am God your God. La'amita shel davar gam advarim shmin adam lechaveri heim bin adam lamakay. Truth to be told, in essence, anything that's been adam lechaveri, that is between one person and another, let's say our horizontal connections, is actually bin adam lamakay. It's actually really about our connection to Hashem. It's really about our vertical connection. V'yesh lehizar behem mishum shezeh ritzayin Hashem. And we have to be careful with these things because this is Hashem's will, that we should be careful with how we treat each other. So in this thing that we're learning, Rashi underscores and adds, that the reason you have to be so careful with your friend is because your friend, your fellow, was created in the image of your creator. Shaychusa shel iser zeh ben adam lamakim ein rak mitzad hatzivui shebedavar hainu sheyesh lizar binyanim elu mitzad tzivui Hashem. The reason that this iser that you would think is only an iser ben adam lechavera is also a iser ben adam lamakim is not only because Hashem commands it, and that's the connection to how it's going to be a trespass in your relationship with Hashem. No, the Rebbe says, "Elagam lefi shechavercha v'hamakom baruch hu hem bidmus achas." I want to read that again. Elagam lefi shechavercha v'hamakom baruch hu hem bidmus achas, because your fellow and Hashem are in one image. In other words, a ben adam la chavere mitzvah is not just also considered a mitzvah ben adam la makayim because Hashem commanded it. No, it's because your fellow human being and Hashem are considered demus achas, one image, kavyachal, as it were, obviously. Ulefichach, and therefore, I hazahiras b'chvoid chavercha nechsheves ki I zahiras b'chvoid HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When you act with disrespect to your fellow, that is considered a disrespect to Hashem's glory. Umeruba midatei v'chulei. And the Rebbe references this axiom that whenever Hashem tells us something that is a negative repercussion, but in the other way, when you do the right thing, the reward is always so much greater if you were to compare it to what would happen in the negative. So the Rebbe says, Meruba midateva, in the positive, this is so much greater. She'avas Yisrael ad la'ahava bilti mugbeles hamevia lidei hanhaga shel kibud chavercha betachlis hasiros. Loving your fellow Jew in a way that has no bilti mugbeles. There's no limit. There's no cap. There's no metric. It's infinite, which leads to a behavior of tremendous respect and being very, very careful with honoring your fellow. Harehi b'pnimiyusa inishal avas HaKadosh Baruch Hu ukvayit shamayim. In essence, this kind of behavior is about loving Hashem and adding glory to Hashem. Ukamayim hapanim lepanim. And just like when you look into the water, your face is reflected back at you. So this has a reciprocal effect. When we love each other in such a way, hadavar megala es avas HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael. Because when we love each other, it is a form of loving Hashem. This causes a ricochet effect, and it reveals Hashem's love for us. Hamevia seif seif laharamas kvoid Yisrael afilu be'eni kol amei haaretz. And in the final analysis, this leads to the glory of the Jews, even in the eyes of all the other nations. Va'ad lekavod ha'amiti sheyiyah begalui begeula ha'amitas v'hashlema aydei Mashiach tzidkenu b'mheira v'yameinu mamash, until it leads to the true glory that will come with the revelation of the redemption. The true glory will be revealed with the redemption, with the true redemption, the complete redemption, through the agency of Mashiach Tzidkenu. May it be speedily in our days. Actually, mamash, mamash, mamash. It can't come too soon. That's our sikha for today. And as usual, everybody is invited to unmute and share. And this is coming as the sikha comes as we come closer to the kinus hashluchis, and the whole idea of the kinus was for people to encourage them, and that's in general the inyan of kinusim, of gathering. The Rebbe would always say that the purpose is that we should come together, we should strengthen each other, we should say to each other chazak, that we should be strengthened. So, and it's really the purpose of this class, of this kinus here every Monday morning. But it puts a whole different level of emphasis and responsibility on how sensitive we have to be to each other, how attentive we have to be towards each other's feelings, and not chas v'chalila slight somebody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. It's amazing. Thank you
Anybody
very
want to
much.
share something, a vart, a story, something?
Just to say what it's